Please rise for the Chair of Thanet District Council.
Please do sit down. Good evening, councillors and officers of the council and members of the press and public. I welcome you to this extraordinary meeting of the council. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security doors to my right or opposite the lifts in the foyer. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. I would advise that if filming takes place, anyone in attendance in the public areas may have their image captured. I urge anyone filming proceedings to avoid filming members of the public, particularly if there are children present. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? Any member of the public who objects to the possibility of being filmed may wish to take this opportunity to leave the meeting. Any filming or recording will not be permitted for any item of business where exempt or confidential information is considered, following the exclusion of the press and public from the meeting. This meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed on YouTube. Would everyone present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls whilst the meeting is in progress. Okay, agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies from councillors Ara, Driver, Faruqi, Paul Moore, Scott, Dennis, Wright. Are there any other apologies, please? Councillor Garner?
Councillors Presland and Wing.
Thank you. Any more? Councillor Curry?
Apologies from Councillor Dabrow.
Thank you. Any more? Councillor?
Councillor Braywood may be here a bit later because he's coming in from work.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers.
Any more?
Councillor Nichols.
Councillor Nichols. That's it. Thank you very much. Announcements. I've been informed of no announcements, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Agenda item 4, local government reorganisation. Before I start this item, please note that I will allow relevant officers to respond to any questions that members may ask relating to this topic during the consideration of this item. I hope you all agree. Thank you. Okay, will the leader, Councillor Everett, please present the report.
Thank you, Chair. As everyone will be aware, there was a white paper published in December which set out plans for English devolution and local government reorganisation. Kent County Council and Medway Council were unsuccessful in applying in January for their combined area to be accepted into the government's priority programme for devolution. The reason given was the imbalance in size between the two councils with upper tier responsibilities that this would have produced in a combined authority. The Minister of State for Local Government then wrote on February the 5th to the leaders of the 14 principal councils in Kent, inviting them to submit indicative proposals for reorganisation into a number of unitary councils by March the 21st. And obviously this timetable has been extremely tight. The paper in front of Council this evening, as Appendix 2 to the Chief Executive's report, forms the basis of a combined submission which has been worked up by all 14 councils on the basis of the common ground between them and in response to the specific questions asked by government. Ministers and civil servants have been clear that this stage of the process will not be used to make decisions and is simply to establish the direction of travel and allow civil servants to comment on the emerging discussions. Arriving at this submission has been a collaborative and constructive process in which Kent's leaders, 6 of them Labour, 4 Conservative, 2 Green, 1 Liberal Democrat and 1 Ashford Independent, have worked across party lines to achieve a consensus. This includes agreement that there should be no more than 4 unitaries and no fewer than 3. Notably, however, it does not extend to agreeing any proposal about potential geography. But even the differences we have on this point do not fall strictly along party lines. There is a strong view in West Kent that they want to have a unitary comprising Sevenoaks, Tunbridge and Malling, Tunbridge Wells and Maidstone. The problem with this from our perspective is that it necessarily limits the options for other areas. These 4 councils, together with KCC, Folkestone and Hythe and Canterbury, commissioned PricewaterhouseCoopers to produce a supplementary document which is included in the papers as Appendix 3. This document includes potential geographies and contains useful information, and it will be submitted by some authorities, but it is not supported by other leaders, including myself, who regard the inclusion of specific geographies as premature. It's also been more difficult to achieve a consensus on the way forward in East Kent than it is in West Kent. Some of the geographies in Appendix 3 are potentially supportable, but we have unanswered questions about the government's criteria, including about the flexibility around the 500,000 population figure and the potential effects on the timetable of introducing changes which divide up parts of existing districts into separate unitaries. Given that the population of Kent is roughly 1.9 million, it's not possible to achieve 4 unitaries that meet the 500,000 threshold, and it's not necessarily sensible to adopt a geography that would most closely approximate to that number in 4 either. To give the most obvious and most local example, there is debate about whether Faversham, which is currently in Swale, would be better placed in a future East Kent unitary, especially as it's already in East Kent as far as the NHS is concerned. However, it might not be right to put Sittingbourne and Sheppey, which are also in Swale, into East Kent. Given our location, there is little risk of Thanet being divided up. However, there is a risk that seeking to divide other districts delays the whole process beyond the current expectation of shadow unitary elections in 2027 and handover in 2028 because of the potential requirement for primary legislation and the involvement of the boundary commissioners. This in turn has the potential to further delay devolution and may not be desirable in terms of managing the transition for our own staff who could face prolonged uncertainty. I am personally very concerned that in a 3 unitary model we could be forced into a very large unitary with Ashford, as well as Dover, Canterbury and Folkestone and Hythe, in which democracy and accountability will be sacrificed on the altar of theoretical efficiency. The world has moved on since 1974, when the current arrangements came into force, and it cannot be sensible to continue with a situation where a Northwood resident can have up to 8 different councillors and a Westgate resident up to 15. It cannot make sense that we control only 11.5% of the council tax bills which go out in this council's name, and that different local authorities are responsible for clearing litter and controlling weeds on the same piece of land. This council is blighted by its lack of financial resilience and its inability to invest in major infrastructure for the benefit of residents. And the district is blighted by the remote decision makers at Kent County Council's lack of interest in safeguarding important local provision like Pie Factory and the Sarah Thorne Theatre. We do not yet know how the government sees the future role of our town and parish councils, and the extent to which they will be able to take on responsibility for protecting our community's sense of identity and place. There are many unanswered questions about how the cost of upper tier services like social care, SEND and looking after unaccompanied asylum seekers will be apportioned and addressed. And it cannot be right that the latter falls entirely on the unitaries which happen to have ports of entry. We will need answers to these questions and many more before we make our final submission on November the 28th. And we will continue to work with our neighbours and colleagues across Kent, as well as engaging with the parishes, towns, other stakeholders and wider public to find and propose the best outcome for Thanet. No one council can be ultimately the decision maker. This council is asked to consider the recommendations in front of Cabinet later tonight, and our commitment is that we will continue to engage publicly and privately across party lines to ensure that what is eventually proposed has the widest possible support. So I'm going to move the recommendation that full council notes the following recommendations to be made to Cabinet later this evening. That Cabinet 1 approves in principle the proposed general submission on behalf of the Kent Councils for Local Government Reorganisation set out at Appendix 2 of the report and delegates authority to the leader to agree any final amendments before submission tomorrow. 2. Note the detailed additional submission related to possible geographical models for new unitary councils set out at Appendix 3 of the report as currently drafted, and agree, for the reasons set out in the report, that at this stage the Council should not be associated with this additional submission. 3. Note that the Leader of the Council and the Chief Executive have, in accordance with their powers, sought to progress negotiations and develop the attached plan for local government reorganisation in the interests of the district. And 4. Agree that the Leader of the Council and the Chief Executive continue to progress negotiations and the development of plans in order to be in a position to submit more detailed plans for local government reorganisation in accordance with the guidance set out in the letter referred to above from the Minister. And I so move. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Alban, thank you. Okay, we can open this up for debate. Who would like to say something? No? Oh. Come on, Councillor Garner.
Thank you. I'm not going to say a great deal. I just want to welcome what Councillor Everett has said. There's a couple of things that he mentioned that I welcome, that I'd just like to highlight. One, you mentioned the involvement of town and parish councils. I think that is very important, that town and parish councils are as involved in these discussions as obviously KCC and all the district councils, because at the end of this process, not everything that is currently the responsibility of KCC and the district councils is going to sit with, or shouldn't sit, with the unitaries. Some of these, the functions, like maybe parks and maybe toilets, would be better suited sitting at the town or parish council level. And the earlier they're involved in these discussions, the better. The other thing I'm really pleased you mentioned was the Pie Factory Youth Club and the Sarah Thorne Theatre. There are a number of reasons why neither of these should be sold and should be disposed of, likely for profit development. And quite rightly, we've, as councillors, most of us, have called on KCC to halt, halt the sale of these assets and any other assets while we're going through this process, so that we know where they would likely sit, and the new unitary or even the new town and parish councils should have the opportunity maybe to take them on and run them as they are at the moment. So I think I know our town council called on KCC to stop the sale of the Sarah Thorne, and I think the majority of us agree that they should not be sold by KCC. And I think that stance stands for the district councils. I don't think district councils should be selling off any of their assets while we're going through this process. And I'll mention this because I think we're all quite aware there is the old TDC depot in Broadstairs, adjacent to Piermont Park, which there's a planning application to build on at the moment, with the view to possibly selling it at some stage in the future. So I'd like to think that if that is the case, that the Cabinet would consider withdrawing that planning application and not consider selling that depot until we know where everything's going to land. Once this process has been completed, where's it all going to be sitting? Because that depot it might be felt that might be a good place. The town council might be a good place for that to be owned, so that they can build up their functionality in the new world as it is after the unitaries are created. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Bang on time. Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Leader, for the work you've put into this to date, because I particularly want to highlight the fact that you pointed out the options on the number of unitaries is still open, because I think that's really important, that there's a fairly robust debate about that. This does seem, from government's point of view, to be very numbers-led and a cost-saving exercise, whereas one of the great benefits of devolution and the reorganisation will be increased democracy and a much stronger voice for local communities, particularly through town and parish councils, hopefully. I'd like to highlight the fact that obviously there's a lot of trust involved here, and this is, it's beyond politics, so we all need to be working for the best outcome, irrespective of our feelings on this. In terms of engagement with those, if I could just ask that all opportunities we push for that local engagement, because they're starting to understand the process now, but there was a lot of disquiet in the community who felt that we were just being driven down, and that was natural, because of course this was brought in very quickly by the government, this opportunity, and it is an opportunity to completely revolutionise the way things are done and to give a much better voice and outcome for the people. So I'd like to welcome this and hope that we actually progress with it. There's one point I'd like to make, and it's about this 500,000 ideal figure. It's not a target, and ultimately it doesn't allow for any growth. Can I just very quickly finish? If we were to take Medway and Kent together, that's about 1.9 million. It's as near as, damn it, 4 unitaries at 500,000, so I don't know why they're creating a problem with this, because I certainly know that Medway were happy with that. I believe all of us were, and it was simply government, but maybe not being fast-tracked will be to our advantage, because we do need to pick our way through this, but ensure a voice for the people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Davis, you may like to know that wasn't a bell for your time up. Somebody... Was it? It was... Yes, as I was saying.
You found a way to do it.
As I was saying, that wasn't a bell for your time up, it was somebody's phone. They told me it couldn't be done. Can you please make sure that your phones are turned off? I don't want anybody to cut their speech short or to be put off by what they're saying. Thank you. Councillor Pugh.
Thank you, Chair. I think everyone will agree. I didn't know it would be that easy, really. But anyway, there's a few things that I'd like to add. A lot has already been covered by the leader, Councillor Davies, and Councillor Garner, so I don't want to repeat. But firstly, I'd like to thank the leader and for officers for making the decision to hold this meeting tonight. I know that it's not necessary and it's not vital to have this, but I agree with the leader that it's really important that everyone has an opportunity to speak in a public and open forum, as we always do in here, about all of this. This devolution and all of this local government reform is incredibly exciting, but it's also very daunting. It's not necessarily daunting just for us as councillors, but it's daunting for our staff. It's daunting for all of the officers at the council. And I think that not just necessarily the quicker that this progresses, but with more detail that comes forward, I think that best serves the officers here at the council, because all of the staff deserve to know and understand their future and what happens and how any unitary that may encompass parts of East Kent or not will look like, because I think it's our utmost and paramount concern needs to be for the staff at this council as well as for our residents and the community. I think there's many things that the County Council does very well. I think there's many things that unfortunately the County Council doesn't do very well. And I would say the same for not just this district council, but for others across Kent and beyond. I think this is a real opportunity for us to not only streamline democracy and how transparent it is, and helping people understand who is the responsible body for many of the services within their area. I probably am not the only one that frequently gets complaints about potholes, and I have to explain repeatedly to many varying residents that it's a KCC responsibility and it's not TDC, not that I don't want to help. So I think that will help, but I think it's important to note, as the leader has and as many others have done already and will, is that this is a very early stage. I think that the suggestion that's been put forward for us to note and what will go to Cabinet later to support Annex 2, as it's being called, I think is the right decision. It's something that I will support because I think we'll all agree that we agree with this in principle. We can debate the speed at which this is going to happen and how effective it will be in the end. But I think Annex 3, the other opinion, is trying to kind of fit a round peg into a square hole too soon, too quick. And I think it will result in mistakes being made. And whilst we're going to move quickly with this, I agree with Councillor Davis. I think maybe it was a blessing that we're not on the priority programme. I think this probably gives a bit of time for not just all of us, but for officers and for the government as well, to really properly look at these plans, not rush them, and get them right. But thank you.
Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Everett. This looks like a proper grown-up, non-partisan affair, and I welcome the direction of travel here. I'd like to reiterate what Councillor Gardner has said with regard to looking at local devolution to local town and parish councils, particularly in my own constituency, Cliftonville East. There are issues that I doubt would be well readily understood in Ashford, and I think it's important that things like public toilets and aspects of our beach management in particular are dealt with on a local level, where there's more accountable local democracy. And I'd fear that that would be lost if powers would evolve to a much, much larger unitary. Today's not been a good day, and it brings into focus one of the issues that I hope TDC will be able to look at before we become a unitary authority, and that's to say, could we please have a review of green spaces, recreational spaces that are owned by TDC, to ensure that they are properly protected when they pass into a unitary authority. On the Palm Bay estate today, we had a parcel of 0.3 of an acre of land which was designated by the original developer, Sunley Estates, as recreational space, with, we hope, appropriate restrictive covenants to protect it as such. However, it sold today at auction for around about £24,000 plus fees. You don't pay £24,000 for a piece of recreational ground unless you plan to do something that won't necessarily be in the best interests of the local residents. And there are several pieces of land in Cliftonville East that belong to TDC, and I hope that we will be able to tie them up properly to protect them from future development and retain them as recreational spaces. So some good housekeeping before we become a unitary would be most welcome. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Yep, I understand the government have promised a paper concerning town and parish councils shortly, and I'd like to see in our submission some recognition of this and as a way of mitigating some of the effects of moving away to more remote councils.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Alban.
Thank you, Chair. I concur with a lot of what's already been said. Councillor Manners, in relation to your stuff you've just talked about, your green spaces, I live there myself, as you know, and you know, we can't deal with private land, that's there, so I mean that's something that we can't deal with. But I think those discussions will take place once we know we've got a direction that we've got to go into. You know, that they're not going to start months away. We will start looking at those kind of things already. But I really wanted to go back to the town and parish councils. that Councillor Garner actually raised. I think that's a very important part of this process. And again, we're not going to find out for some while as to what government's point in the way as to what they think that both parish and town councils will actually take on, or may take on, or may not take on. Have they got a right to take them on? Can they take? Will the government impose it on? Don't know, do we? But at Ramsgate Town Council, we've got our yearly town meeting, which is taking place in a couple of weeks' time. And part of that is to address to the residents exactly where we are with this local government reorganisation and up to that point. Because it's right what Councillor Pugh said, you know, we need our residents to understand it. They don't understand half of the stuff that we do and half the stuff that Kent County do, but we need to get them to understand that it will be all under one umbrella. And I think that is that's the way forward. As the chair of Ramsgate Town Council, I've asked the town clerk to contact both Broadstairs Town Council and the parishes so that we can all meet. So that's very important, I think, that we do that so that we all understand the same thing and hopefully can all go in the same direction. But just for instance, a difficulty with it, Dover District Council doesn't run any of their public toilets. They're all run by parishes. Thanet District Council doesn't, as you know. It's all done by the district. So that's just a small indication of an issue that you may have. So what will happen if we go in with Dover? Are they going to have to, is the unitary going to have to take back all those toilets, or are they going to remain with the parishes, or are we going to put ours out to the town councils? So I think all those type of things are interesting, but also can be a bit of a nightmare. And I think part of that is for us to deal with it. I'm extremely grateful for the leader of the council for the amount of time that he's put in, the amount of meetings that he's gone in, both with and with the chief executive. Most of it's a bit mind-blowing, I think. But to get all the councils to try and agree one way forward is the most difficult thing. And it's not on political grounds, it's on tribal grounds of the areas that they live in. So I think we're in for a bit of a tough time, but I think, as we say, there is no party politics in this, right? We need to all work together to get this done and get it over the line that satisfies, and we can deal with it the best way we can for our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Cabright.
Thank you, Chair. So I work in telling stories. That's my day job, essentially, which is a bit of an odd one. And I think there's a story here that we've all told, and I think Councillor Pugh, wait for it, is right when he says this is an exciting story. yeah, exciting. But there's a serious point here, and our story, what we're talking about here, we're thinking about what things are going to look like in 10 or 15 years' time, and we're thinking about what that story looks like. What we're not telling a story about is we're not telling a story about the efficiency savings that will be made by a three-tier authority. And I fully support the recommendation that we do not support Annex 3, because I tell you who's rubbish at telling stories and is rubbish at listening to stories are our auditors. And it's an auditor's report based on what works for the people that commissioned that audit and what saves money. So if you're a government minister, you're going to be looking at that and you're going to be saying, okay, that makes sense to me. And I think we need to start telling our story. And whatever happens next, we need to bring residents along with us, because I do branding, and whatever happens next must have a brand. It must have a feeling of identity for all the residents who live in whatever authority it's going to be. And it's really important that they're engaged at every step. it's really important that their sense of identity is made very clear to whoever it is in government that is making these decisions. And finally, I really like coming here. I really like doing these meetings. And I think a lot of people do. I think we wouldn't be here if we didn't do it. And actually, I don't think I would be able to if we were stretched all the way out to Tenterden. Broadstairs from Tenterden is probably about as far away as you can possibly drive and still be in possibly the country. And I don't think I would be able to do that. So we risk, by having too big a geographical area, we risk actually excluding anyone that has a job, anyone that is maybe under 65, 70 years old. And I think it's really important that we keep this diverse mixture of councillors. So I think that's a real argument, and we need to tell the story of why it's important that we have real representation in whatever comes next, and that we don't have a really blinkered view on what saves the government enough money very quickly.
Thank you. I saw a couple of over 65-year-old eyebrows going up then. Won't say whose, but thank you. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Leader, for the report. I'm just going to focus on one specific area, and that's council tax support scheme. I think we should all know by now that we've got actually one of the most generous council tax support schemes in Kent, actually the most generous in Kent at 90%. So can the Leader provide any reassurance that during these negotiations the outcome aims to protect that 90% council tax support scheme in order to protect the most vulnerable in our society, and I think that would be an outcome that everyone across this chamber would want. Thank you.
Councillor Will Scobie.
Thank you, Chair. There's 2 points I want to make. As a former KCC councillor, and I spent 2 years on TDC and KCC, I can see absolutely the reason why we're moving to a unitary. Anyone who spent that time trying to work out, I've got a piece of casework, where does this sit? And I know there's lots of members here that have had the same thing, know that having that split doesn't make any sense. It confuses residents, it costs a lot of money, and I've long supported a unitary authority of bringing powers back to East Kent, because having spent many hours driving to Maidstone and trying to convince cabinet members representing rural parts of West Kent to think about Margate and Thanet, it's not on their agenda. Their power base is in West Kent, that's where they get their votes from, and that's where they make decisions. And I could come up with 10, 15, 20 decisions when I was on KCC that absolutely exemplified that. And I'm sure there's people in here that have similar stories. It absolutely needs to change. The bit of extra context I wanted to add, though, is around the speed of it. So lots of people have said, it's maybe good that we've got more time to get this right, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, except for the state of Kent County Council at the moment. You just need to look at their financial reports, go through their risk register, look at their auditors' reports, listen to comments that people are making in the council chamber. This is a county council that is in trouble, that has got massive bills hoisted on it because of decisions made in central government over the last 10, 15 years that have left it completely hampered. So on the one hand, we do have time to work out how to deal with this, but we also have an upper tier authority who is setting a year-on-year budget and making short-term decisions just to be able to set a legal budget. And that's very dangerous for all of us, because that is our collective debts we're going to be taking on. So I think that has to be seen properly in this context, because in my mind, the reason I think that this is being moved so quickly is you have a new government that came in and was elected last year that is looking to rebuild public services, and they can't do it with a county council that's nearly bankrupt and is unable to deliver simple services. And I think part of the rush to do this is actually to restructure local government, so when they put reform in and when they put funding in, there is actually a local government instrument in Kent that can actually deliver this stuff, because that doesn't exist right now. So just wanted to add those comments, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Leader, for what I think is a really hard job that you've got in front of you, and thank you for including us in it. I represent a ward which has 5 parish councils in, and they work hard, and they are deeply engaged, and they're deeply concerned about the things that impact their communities. But because of the structure, e.g., i.e. unpaid, it makes it very difficult for them to recruit, and it makes it extremely difficult for their members to be diverse in a way that this council, this council has a lot greater diversity than they do. And I would like I'd like any decisions to think long and hard about how we protect and how we support the genuine representation. If greater responsibility is going to fall on those councils, how we think about how that represents the communities better. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Leader, for your preamble, and thanks for those background papers we had, because that gives us a lot of insight into the thought processes in the background, into what's actually happening to those that have actually read it. In the preamble, you said there's lots of unanswered questions, and I think there actually is a lot of speculation going on and a lot of guesswork, which is disappointing that we haven't got anything fixed that we know about, and we won't know until 2026 what the options are going to be, and then we're going to be 1 year away from a district election, and I just wondered if the leaders have talked about whether those elections are going to be postponed in 27, because that's going to cause problems for parish councils, because they hold their elections at the same time. Obviously, if they're going to be out of kilter, then there's going to be an extra expense for parish councils to hold those elections. Obviously, selections and also I just wondered where those costs are going to be absorbed. But like you say, a lot of it's premature and it's going to be a prolonged process, and I just wondered if you could give any insight into those 27 elections.
Thank you. I'll just hold that question for a minute, or maybe not so long. Does anybody else have anything to say? Anybody else? Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. Like many of us here, I've spent the vast majority of my life in Thanet, and obviously everyone believes that their home is special. But in terms of our demographics and our geography, we genuinely are. And I understand fully the benefits of unitary function, especially from a resident standpoint, because knowing exactly where to go is a very positive thing. But I'm yet to see evidence that unitaries of the proposed scale can deliver for areas that suffer from significant deprivation, that have populations with significant vulnerabilities. And this is where my principal concern lies currently. I'd like to echo a version of Councillor Bright's point from earlier in terms of the geography that's required around the larger numbers for unitaries, because I do think that that potentially reduces the diversity within chambers, the ability for people to find a central point or to be involved in politics and to genuinely represent local politics. These are all things that can be worked on within the process, but they're the things that I think residents need to know that we are aware of and we are considering, and we are doing our best to navigate our way through. I would also like to say huge thanks at this point to Councillor Everett and to our Chief Exec, because the number of meetings involved in this is extraordinary, and the scale of bringing together multiple councils and how to do it best is a literally mammoth task. So thank you to everybody involved, and I hope that residents know how hard everyone is working for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else before I bring Councillor Everett back in to sum up. Councillor Everett.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the contributions, which I think have been constructive. Just on the subject of the sheer number of meetings that have taken place, I mean, it's absolutely true. I mean, it's extraordinary the number of meetings we've had on this subject and the number of briefings we've had from different local authority organisations, the District Councils Network, the LGA, briefings from ministers, the number of meetings there have been among East Kent leaders, the meetings we've had at this council. It has been extraordinary, and I think the point it makes is not that it's a lot of work for me. What concerns me is that this process is going to be a lot of work for officers, and it's important that we don't allow it to distract us from delivering from our residents over the timescale that we've got to work on it, because our residents want our services out there and they want them to the standard they expect, and that has to be done on top of these discussions, not you know, it doesn't need to be affected by them. We can't allow that to happen. One of the points about representation and diversity, and I think, is that if we have a very large geographical area and a very large population, we're quite likely to end up with a council with 100 members. And that means that even if you're elected to represent a particular community in Thanet, your voice is going to be quite limited in the scope of a council meeting. You know, we struggle sometimes with 56 members, and I think we've got too many members, but I mean, a meeting of 100 members, it's going to be quite difficult to manage. And there are ways of breaking that down in terms of local area committees, certainly in terms of planning and licensing and things like that, but ultimately it may be quite difficult when you get to the executive level. There's been a lot of talk about the role of the parishes, and I'm absolutely sympathetic to that. We've discussed this twice at the parish forum. The problem is we're not really at the stage where we can say anything useful to the parishes. Hopefully something will emerge from the Green Paper, I think it is, that Councillor Green has referred to earlier on. At the moment, we're just trying to grapple with the bigger concept. So there's nothing in this submission which really talks about in any detail about what's going to happen for the parishes. But I certainly understand their caution. I think one thing I would say is a lot of those decisions are going to be made by the successor body. They'll be made by the shadow council that will be elected in 2027. Because unless the government gives specific responsibilities to town and parishes, which I think will be difficult to do, they're only going to get stuff which is delegated from the next tier up. And that may well be around parks and toilets and issues like that. What the government won't want to do, I think, is reinvent the pre-1974 situation. The reason that there was reorganisation in 1974 was because it was very inefficient. And I think they will want to avoid doing that. And there are all sorts of questions about what level of council tax can be raised. Just finally, on the subject of the elections, if we go to the shadow unitary elections in 2027, there will not be district council elections. The government's already said that. If the successor authorities are coming in 2028. So this council would continue until April the 1st, 2028. The issue around the parishes is there would be parish elections. The problem we have is that the parish elections should be on the new boundaries, which means that we need to do a community governance review based on the new boundaries. But the elections, it's not clear what the elections to the shadow unitary would be based on. And you can't have two elections on the same day based on different systems. So I know Mr Hughes is very focused on this, as you might expect. But we would expect there was to be parish elections in 2027 in any event. We're just not clear on what boundaries. And I'm really not going to get into the subject of how we set Margate Town Council up in this peculiar situation either. But thank you very much for what everybody said. We will try to continue to engage with the whole council on these matters, because I think it's a matter of concern for all of us and for our community. And I think we do recognise the need to speak to the public more broadly, but it's really not been possible in the timescale that we've been given to present this submission. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Everett. A limited voice in the council chamber. I can't perish the thought. I have to ask the question, do councillors agree? Agree. Thank you. That concludes the business of this extraordinary meeting. Thank you very much.